TLD. PJ Campbell. 2 mediocre white dudes on film. Because frankly, we know you don't have enough of that in your life. So we're here to give you more. And without further ado, here are 2 mediocre white dudes on film.
Good morning.
We are back.
Hello.
Good morning.
How are you?
Well, I am doing okay. As people know, this is actually the first time you're seeing me in about a week or so. I got hit pretty hard by my own personal Jason Voorhees. I call it some kind of sickness. I don't even know what it was. Down with the sickness.
You call it asthma. It's fine. Let's call it what it is.
Well, I was going to get there. It was a sickness I had first, and then it kind of got into my asthma.
Sorry, I went to the last page first. Sorry, guys. I revealed the twist.
But as the famous saying in Karate Kid 3 would say, man can't breathe, man can't fight. So I was left without a fight for a little bit, but I am back. I am here. I hated canceling last week, but I'm happy that we are finally back to talk about Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. My friend, you also had a very interesting journey this weekend. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I went up to LA to see Coheed and Cambria because as one does, Coheed and Cambria tours, even within, 500 miles, and you're like, let me get all the tickets, please, and thank you. And I met up with some of our old friends from the Schmodown, Sean and Rachel and Dan and some of the others, and it was a great show. The show was incredible. The weekend itself was kind of chaotic. Unfortunately, just weird situations with Airbnb. You know what, man? Use hotels. That's all I'm gonna say. It's much easier these days. Airbnb was like cool for a time, and now it's not. As it turns out, it is not cool anymore. Pain in the ass all weekend trying to deal with that. That sucks. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Right?
Because more and more.
There's no world with Airbnb where they're like checking every listing that they have. There's no like quality control in how they handle things in their situations. And that really just makes for a bad experience for everyone. Because if you aren't like controlling your quality and the things that you have that are on your app and site, they're speaking for you, but you're not doing anything about it. Therefore, you now look bad because of it.
Right.
And Airbnb has continued to let this happen a lot. And It's just fucking wild to me.
Well, all I know is I am also not using Airbnb. I'm going up on a journey. I'm going to get better, get healthy. And this weekend I'm using a hotel, and then I'm going to be crashing at a friend's house. So no Airbnb for me.
I thought you were being clever talking about the fact that you were coming out here to visit next weekend. I was like, no, you're not staying in a hotel. You're staying with me, you fuck.
I know. I'm going to New York this weekend first. That's the hotel part.
I know.
I'm going to New York this weekend to see our friend Mark Ellis in a comedy show. Mark Ellis, Ken Knapsack, Jen Sturger. Should be a fun time there. Hopefully I'll be full out, ready to go. I believe our friend Jeff Alterman is going to make an appearance there potentially. Should be a lot of fun. And then of course Sunday you go see Coheed and see Coheed all the time you can. I go see Queen when I can. And Sunday I'm going to see Queen and Adam Lambert in Boston before finally next week coming out to visit you in Arizona, something you have tried to get me to do for about 5 years now, I think.
Yeah, I know. And here's the best part is now you're going to see it and I'm going to be like, hey, you should move here. There's houses that are available in my neighborhood.
All of a sudden, we're going on a real estate shopping spree as PJ is going to show me every house in the neighborhood.
Hey, look, who doesn't want to have us as, potential neighbors together?
Absolutely. We're going to form a commune. We're going to form a little horror commune, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. And it'll be the
who cares
shining.
If we end up like putting a river in the middle of the area so that we can ride on like little rafts by ourselves, drinking beers and hanging out, like a lazy river.
That sounds so good. There's nothing like a good lazy river, man. I really want commune with a lazy river for myself and like a few other people. You know what I mean?
Dude, I'm not gonna lie to you. This just makes me want to go back to Universal and go to Volcano Bay so I can sit in the lazy river all afternoon, just vibing with. That's the best. There's just nothing like a good lazy river.
But you know what I'm saying also is the fact that, like, because I just don't like people generally. Like, I hate crowds of people. So, like, don't give me
Yeah,
that. Like, give me my own personal lazy river, like you, me, Kim, and like people, like a couple people we know, that kind of
yeah.
thing. And just that's our own personal lazy river. Maybe it's a lazy river on beer. I don't know what it is, but either way,
Oh my
I'm fine
god,
with that.
imagine that. A lazy river on beer. Now
Uh,
that's something I could sign up for, although a lazy river with the margarita is not to be messed with.
Ooh, I could use it. I could use Jack. A little whiskey in there as well, maybe potentially. I could use that. We could make this work. We are going to be.
There's a world where this works.
We're going to bring our blackboards. We're going to map all this out. This is going to be my first journey to Arizona, and by the time we're done, we'll have it mapped out. So when I come back, we'll be all ready to go, all moved in.
Yeah, see, that's exactly how it works. Kim's gonna love it out here.
She's going to absolutely love it. She's not listening to me, thank God, right now.
Well, I mean, look, it's not the first time that we've just gone off the rails, and Kim will have to, deal with the
Follow
repercussions later.
along. She'll follow along. She always does.
I mean, look, as long as you bring the kitten, we're fine, right?
Right. That's true. And not even more with the kids. You got to bring the cat and the dog. That's all she cares about at this point.
Yeah, the kids will be fine. I mean, just put them out in the middle of the desert, fend for yourself. You'll figure it out.
We've taught them well. They're good. They're good enough on their own now.
They're hunter gatherers, Paul. That's what I've been led to believe is we're supposed to be hunter gatherers in this world. So your kids
Absolutely.
should just be able to handle this, right? That's what I was led to believe.
Absolutely. They should be able to. We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out for sure. If I could
It's
handle it, they
almost
could handle
like
it.
they grew up around you and you watched a lot of horror movies about people having to, survive and
Survive.
adapt and get by when people in crazed hockey masks with machetes run around.
Right. Even if they're fake hot people with hockey masks and machetes. As it turns out. Uh what I feel like I should do this because I guess this is against everything. Only 7 minutes in, but I also got inspired to transition into like saying what an amazingly weird movie this is for me. Still, um,
Yeah,
I just feel like I have a love. It's not even a love hate relationship. It seems like every time I watch it, I see something new, and well, that's not necessarily good. It's not necessarily bad, but I almost feel bad for this movie because I came up with something last night, a conversation I was having with Lego while we were recording review. I came to this like epiphany. It's not like a very smart. I'm a slow man. I'm not a genius, but I feel like
no, you're not, but
bad.
that's fine.
This one gets a bad rap a lot of times because you put it between two of the most beloved entries in the franchise. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, one of the most loved of the definitely probably the most loved of the first four. Jason
Yes.
Lives has great love amongst the fandom, including ourselves. We both can't wait to talk about that one. So there you
Uh-huh.
go. In the middle, you have this kind of like bastard child of a movie that's kind of finding its way.
Well, and
um,
not just that, to your point, like the weirdness is we were talking about it a little bit last night. It's also because this might be the first time in like horror franchise history that you just jettison a previous movie's like story from continuity and just kind of ignore it.
right, right,
Because that is part of the problem is that there's no follow-up to this movie. There's no answer to what this movie is asking of its audience. And no one was ready for a film in this franchise that potentially took the hero of the last movie and turned them into the killer.
right. And what's weird about it too is the fact that we have Halloween 3, which is obviously kind of brought up as a little bit of a comparison because Halloween 3 was Michael Myerless. This is kind of Jason Voorhees-less in a way, but it's almost like they couldn't commit fully to the idea, so they had to like half-ass it in a way. I do feel bad for them to a degree. If you watch the Crystal Lake Memories um, DVD or documentary about this particular chapter,
Right
you
here.
realize that there you go, perfect, wonderful documentaries.
Yes.
They're left in kind of this weird spot after 4. I mean, they sold 4 as the final chapter. Now, this is kind of I mean, nowadays that's nothing new. But I kind of feel like back in the early 80s at that point, marketing something as the final chapter was kind of a new thing. They weren't going to do anymore. Now, obviously, it made money, so there's no way this was going to be the final. I mean, this what was a year later came out as
Yeah.
the new beginning, but
Well,
they still had to kind of make that ground of like, okay, well, we just had the final chapter. We just almost definitively killed Jason at this point. I mean, Tom Savini's blade to the head, like sliding down the sword, was or the machete rather was like the most definitive way they could end it. So we got to come up with what can we do to make a new beginning, right?
Well, and so what's weird is then you start to listen to your point, them talking about the creation of this movie in Crystal Lake Memories, and it's funny because they say pretty much up front that they'd always had the idea of bringing back Tommy. Like the idea was always basically to move forward with another film
Right.
with Tommy in the lead, and yet at the same time, then Corey Feldman blows up and he wants to work with Steven Spielberg, and I don't know if he's being necessarily cattily honest about that either in the documentary, where he kind of badmouths Spielberg, and it's like a weird moment where he's like, "I didn't want to do those movies. I was kind of forced into it. Like I wanted to do Friday the 13th Part 5, but at the
I
same time, he got the Goonies."
Yeah, I feel like I was watching it, I kind of felt the same way. It felt a little weird, as for what he was saying. I honestly think Corey let's get it out there. Corey Feldman is kind of, especially in his adult years, has been a very interesting individual. Um,
Yeah.
he definitely went through things as a kid, as a child actor. Uh, they're kind of common knowledge, but I don't want to get into anything because I don't really know. We don't know the truth here and there. This is
Yeah.
whatever. Either way, looking back, I felt like when I was watching this documentary, he knows where his audience is right now, so he's got to play that up a little bit. But I kind of do feel like he wanted to do it all. I think he wanted to do, not that he didn't want to do the Spielberg films, but I think he really did love Friday the 13th and loved working on part 4. So he wanted
I
to do
think so
part
too.
5 as well. So I think that he's the kind of kid that wanted to do everything. And the fact was, if he was going to do the Spielberg film, which was probably the right to call for him to make for his career, let's get into a more mainstream with the greatest living director of our time. Let's get involved with that. And that's better for my career. But at the same time, him down deep was like, but I also want to do what I want. I love horror. I love Friday the 13th. I want to do that as well. So the fact that he couldn't do both makes him say, well, I had to do these because that's what it was supposed to do. But I regret not being able to do this one as well.
It could be that. It just comes off very weird. But what's
Yeah.
interesting is like, so then they bridge it with a cameo by him where he gets almost no dialogue. And
Yeah.
ultimately, so let's just, we'll hop into it. We're in the way back machine. We go back to 1985 and we're doing the thing again. They've decided that in March of 85, we're doing a new Friday the 13th. We've got to do a follow up to part 4 that made a lot of money. Be damned the fact that we said it was the final chapter last time. But the interesting swerve here is that you start to see pullback from people who have been involved in the franchise a lot to this point as well.
Right.
Because Frank Mancuso Jr. starts to pull back and he's no longer nearly as involved as he was.
Right.
And he's taking an executive producer role and they hand the reins to this director that no one really knew anything about named Danny Steinman. And they decide to try to do a movie that's more like the first again. But the problem in doing that is you are now going back to the beginning, and what you end up with, and this is going to sound a little mean, and I don't mean it to sound the way that it will, but it becomes a sad cover band at times of what it's trying to accomplish. While
Right.
other times, I think the movie is actually super fun, and I like some of the characters. And this also, for some reason, might be the movie that I think people think is what Friday the 13th is. Um, when you think of
Yeah.
like the gratuitous sex and nudity that like the franchise has become known for, it's always been in the movies, but this is the movie that it like the nudity is really in your face and really like this movie is sleazy and dirty and kind of an exploitation film. And so that's
Well,
a little bit
yeah.
of a different vibe. No, and not in a bad way, but
Right.
because of that, that's kind of what I think people think the franchise really is.
Right. Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
it weirdly births that into existence, even though it's also like the weird redheaded stepchild.
Right. And that's what you get for hiring Denny Steinman, who had been known as, again, an adult filmmaker. He had made
Yeah.
some porn and everything else. That was a style of movie he made, and you're absolutely right. Got to the point where even Mancuso was saying, like, a lot of people were surprised at how sleazy it had gotten. Like, it had been like subtly sleazy before. Like, there was definitely some, the general
Right.
TNA. There's been drug use here and there. It's kind of just whatever. This was like pretty much in your face. Like, they hired actresses with large breasts for that exact reason. Like, it was like not even like trying to hide anything about it anymore. It was like, we know what we want to produce, or we want to give here, and we're going to do it. And it almost felt like they were trying to make up for the fact that, like, they didn't have the character of Jason Voorhees, because it's one of those things where on paper it sounds like, maybe, well, how do we move forward? We don't have Jason. They kind of set forth they're not going to have Jason. We're not to the point yet, like, where we're like bringing Jason back no matter what happens every time. I don't care what happens. We're bringing Jason back somehow. They're not doing that yet. So instead, they got to work around it in their heads. They're like, well, what do we do? Maybe a copycat killer. We can make that work. We still got the idea of Jason. I mean, it's almost a subtle nod at what goes on in real life. You can put anybody in a mask. You don't know where the actor playing Jason. You can put anybody in the mask. Really, we can get our own little Jason. But at the same time, they set things up with which way to go in part 4, and they fumble it. They fumble it bad. Um, Whether it was the rush to get it out because they wanted to, like, have the every year thing going on. I mean, I feel like they should have waited for Corey Feldman. If Corey Feldman gets
I
too
think so
busy,
too.
you wait, because they make a choice, and it's a strong choice. I can't even say I will not say it's a good choice, but to age up Tommy, to bulk up Tommy, to fight Jason, which I understand what going on in their heads about it, but it works better. Again, like everything in this family works better on paper than it does in execution, and that's the main problem. Um, so instead, we get like this other Tommy who doesn't even look anything like Tommy or mind you anything of Tommy. Instead of waiting for Corey Feldman, who up until this point was probably, I'll say, yeah, he was the most charismatic. Okay, outside maybe Crispin Glover, was the most charismatic actor who had been in the franchise.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you doing? You're going to put him in the beginning. You're going to film something in his backyard, this cheap little like opening beginning.
With no dialogue.
There's no dialogue. You have a guy who's probably one of the hottest stars there. He's obviously willing to do your movie, unless the agents were involved and parents were involved or something that we don't know about, that were pushing him, like they wouldn't let him do it. They obviously let him do a cameo. I can't believe
Yeah.
they wouldn't let him do the whole thing. A lot of mistakes were made. A lot of it good intentioned, but unfortunately the execution just failed overall. We end up in this kind of like treading water.
Yeah, and I'll say this, I do appreciate it tries to take a weird psychological swing too, and,
Mhm.
apparently the idea really is that when they finally knew that this is what they were gonna do, was that every film was basically gonna be, for the next 3, a different killer. It would always be believed that Tommy was somehow possessed by Jason, because the movie goes way out of its way to go the extra mile with that by the time it's over.
Mhm.
But the idea is that it would still be a different killer every movie, which is kind of funny that that studio note, in some regards, is kind of what Scream becomes. In a lot of
Mhm.
ways, this might be the first time also, and it can be seen as weirdly inspirational to the Scream franchise, of someone taking the iconic mask of a killer and handing it off in the next movie to someone else because you've already killed the killer.
Right.
So there's something to be said about what Friday Part 5 is trying to do, actually. I think a lot of the stuff on paper is really good, and I do think that some of the movie itself is very good. But the problem is that the movie almost feels toothless at times, as weird as that might sound, because
Right.
so much of the violence was cut out of the movie.
Right.
Uh, this movie notoriously had problems with the MPAA over time of trying to secure the R rating, and one death in particular was kind of used as the linchpin to get more nudity for less violence, which
Right.
is such a weird thing also, and just continues to make me ponder so much of what the point of the MPAA really even is,
Yeah,
or was, or
that's the whole war of
whatever
the
you wanna
'80s in
say now,
general,
because we
really.
still have another ratings board these days, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but you kinda look at all of this, and the movie becomes kind of this weird smorgasbord of cool ideaed kills that don't go anywhere because they're shown off screen. Like we're getting there's cool like the clippers coming down into eyeballs and us seeing the angle of the clippers coming down,
Right.
and but then you only see the aftermath. So many of the
Right.
kills feel like that's what we're seeing, or they feel
Right.
very familiar, like another dead person in the bed thing.
I wrote that in my notes at one point. I actually complained about that last time, and here it is. Like it's still going on. It's like it's almost like they're trying to do the joke, right? Where you tell a joke so many times and eventually it gets bad, but you keep going with it, that eventually becomes funny again. I kind of feel like that's what they're
Yeah.
going for. They're trying to like get you to do it, but at the same time, it just doesn't work. It's like, okay, we've seen this before, and that's been you made that note before. A sad cover band. That's kind of what it is. It feels like just a lot of the times, like it's like, okay, I've seen these deaths before. There's nothing really new and inventive here. It doesn't have like the Tom Savini like magic to it. It's just kind of like they're not very inventive deaths. They're more worried about the nudity side of things, the showy side of things, and what's going on. Like as far as like these red herrings, because they try to sprinkle red herrings throughout the entire movies. It
Again,
could be
very
this
Scream.
person, could be this person. Absolutely, and it's funny you say that too. Of course, with Scream, because Jason Lives, the next chapter, is also obviously a heavily influence on Scream as far as like the meta part of things
Yeah.
go. So Kevin Williamson, we see you. We know you're a Friday the 13th fan. Absolutely at this point.
Yeah, like the last 4 movies in the or the last 3 movies or so in this franchise, it is not lost on us that Kevin Williamson is in fact also a Friday the 13th and slasher fan.
100%, 100%. It just, but it feels unfortunately the worst thing about it is again kind of going along with the sad mentality. It just feels flat. The whole thing kind of feels flat overall. They have sparks of like humor, sparks of like things that could have been, but it's trapped in this film that just feels like a retread. And the main crux of that is you had, much like Halloween 5, you had something set up that you could explore, which would have been fascinating. Exploring Tommy as Jason or whatever is a fascinating choice and something would have been worthy to go down that road to explore that. Even if you age Corey Feldman up, fine if you have to do that and hire this other new guy. But explore that territory. That becomes less of a cover band and whoever's starting out and trying something new. At least it's a swing. This is like a swing and a miss.
I mean, and I appreciate the swing. And what's so funny is that I don't think the movie actually even fully I don't think it actually fully understands its own voice and vision, and I don't think it ever really hones in on exactly what it's trying to do because the whole point of the movie ends with us learning that Roy is the killer.
Spoiler
Roy,
alert.
the sad paramedic, yeah. Roy, the sad paramedic, who apparently is related to a child who is at this institute that he's never talked about. And all of this comes out so conveniently only for us to have Tommy wake up,
Right.
which has made me wonder over the years because the movie never fully commits to this, I don't think. I don't know if Roy is actually really the killer
Interesting.
because we don't ever like we see them tell Pam, "Hey, here's all the things that happened," but that immediately leads to Tommy waking up. So there's a part of me that has always wondered if that's actually part of his dream sequence and he is making up excuses because you're telling me that this guy who is killing everyone, his motive is exactly the same as Jason's mother, and
And
that you know what I'm saying?
I never thought of it that way. I do think your imagination is too much for this franchise. It's definitely not
I
something they were
I think
planning
so
on.
too.
I don't think they're that. I think it's just too tired of a film to do that. I think, in fact, the way they kind of blur out that it's Roy at the end, it's kind of like their way of going, I don't know how to end this. We're just going to say, oh, it's Roy. Okay, fine. Let's just get it out there. But if we're putting on my thinking cap and putting on the like imaginative side of things, it's an interesting concept. It's definitely an interesting concept. Of course, it's proven. I mean, the way we see, you're saying could it be really Tommy after all? Maybe, which would be kind of cool. But at the
Because
same
what if the
time,
whole no, because that basically becomes is the whole third act in his head.
Right, which is fine, but then, of
Yeah.
course, you have 6 following up with Jason Lives, which would pretty much decry that again anyway, though, at that point, doesn't it?
Well, exactly. But this movie is ignored across the board by the
Sure.
time you get to the next one,
You're
regardless.
trying to
So
make this
that
better. That's what you're doing. You're trying to make this better. I see what you're doing,
no,
and I appreciate
I'm
it.
not even saying that. I think that's my big problem, though, is
Yeah,
that the movie never commits into its full ideas because when you look at it, there's 100% two very different messages at play,
right.
and then the movie puts the mask on him at the end after the
Yeah,
weird ghost Jason thing. So that's why I do wonder if, as it turns out, like most of it is in his head the whole time. I don't think the movie is trying to say that, but there's too much going on that lends to that,
yeah.
which also gives to the point that this movie has no real like full structure at times of what it's trying to do because
Well
it wants everyone to be the red herring.
well, that's very true. Just have the red herring bit about it. The problem I have, like, I kinda like that concept in a way. In a way, I kinda think it's a better concept than the one we got. But at the same time, it means what's the point of the movie, though? Because like, so we
Right.
have at the end of chapter 4, we have Tommy being teased as potentially going crazy. He has a look in his eye, fine. So we go through a movie at the end of 5, it's ends with another Tommy tease that maybe he's Jason after like so it's basically we've made no progress. It's like the whole thing is this might be the case. So what a waste of a movie that is, right? At this point, like what
Uh-huh.
besides some cheap kills, like this whole thing is like conceptually, I don't know. Yeah, I like what you're saying. I don't like what you're saying. I don't think the movie's presenting itself that way. The movie presents itself as Roy Burns being the killer, but that's not any better because, quite frankly, I don't even think he has that great of a motivation. Okay, so he does. Maybe loves his son that he abandoned, sees him dead, and decides just to kill everybody. Like, I, even people who have nothing to do with anything, like the two greasers, like the two gay greaser guys, um, the rednecks,
Yeah.
and everybody just up for
People at the
blood now.
diner.
People at the diner who have nothing to do with these kids, like none of it makes a whole lot of sense. Not that killing doesn't make a whole lot of sense anyway. Maybe he snapped and that's what it is. It just felt like this weird, like, this is what happened. This is why it happened. It doesn't feel like it satisfies at all in any way, shape, or form.
I think that's why the movie ends the way that it does, as weird as it sounds. And again, it just kind of leads some credence in my idea that I kind of think that this movie does the sin of all sins. I think it could be seen as an entire dream sequence
Oh, it could be. It could
because
be.
the movie begins and ends with Tommy waking up
Maybe that's
from
the
these
best way to do it.
nightmares. You know what I'm saying? Like, look at the way that the movie opens with him having nightmares as a kid of Jason coming back to life, and
Mhm.
that's when he wakes up as he's being taken to the place, only then to wake up again after all the violence is over and to don the hockey mask. What if it's all been in his head this whole time and he's really the one? He's just like in his head. I'm being way too smart for it, but it's like
Yeah.
that's why even Roy's motive legitimately doesn't come off as anything other than a Pamela retread, and maybe that's in Tommy's head
Right.
that he is making up excuses for why he's actually the murderer. He is just adopting Jason
I
and like
think
Jason's motives. As weird as that sounds.
no. I actually I get what you're saying, and I actually, in a weird way, I prefer that to what we got because what we end up getting is again, when it comes down to on paper, maybe it looked good, but in execution, it just sucks in terms of things, how things go. Because quite frankly, at the end of the day, we're taking out Jason. That was the whole starting point. We had no Jason, but it just underlines how important the iconicness of having that Jason character really is. Because sure, anyone can take up the mask, but if it is just someone in a mask, it is just a paramedic in a mask. Like at the end of the day, it's kind of like, oh, okay, so he's just not as scary and not as intimidating. He gets taken out by Tommy, by Reggie, by Pam, and like at the end of the day, what did we get out of this? Absolutely nothing. We got nowhere at all. The only thing good that comes out of this film is Reggie, probably. That's about it.
Yeah, it's kind of an unfortunate thing because it's not even that this movie is bad. It's really not. I think that there's a lot of interesting things going on within again, like I thought the idea of playing with the who actually is the killer angle is super interesting, but the problem is that I don't care about any of the characters in this movie. And that might be one of the biggest sins of this movie, is that I
Uh,
just don't care. And not even in like a fun way, right? But in a, oh boy, none of these characters are like that fun to hang around. Like they're all just one-off characters because this movie has the biggest body count to this point in the franchise. So everyone you're introduced to is just there to die.
yeah, that's absolutely true. Uh, it's funny you mentioned the whodunit angle. You mentioned it before. This is a case of them trying to go back to its roots. Like obviously, the first film in the franchise was a whodunit. It was we didn't find out to the end that it was Pamela Voorhees doing it. Jason not even involved at all. So it's the same kind of thing. Here we have a film where there is no Jason, and we're trying to figure out who is taking up the mantle. But because you can't go when you go so far, you can't go back. That worked for the first film
Right.
because it was a new story. Now that you've introduced Jason and that's become the formula, trying to reinvent the formula while keeping the Jason angle alive in some way, shape, or form just doesn't work. It just doesn't work at all. And like you say, I also want to throw out there that like I feel like we're being very negative towards the film, and we are to a degree, but I don't mind this film either as a whole. I almost feel like we're bashing it because we saw that it could have been a lot more, and we wanted a lot more about it.
I don't
I want
even
to throw
think we're
something at
being
you.
like negative. I think this is just constructive criticism on a movie that I actually enjoy watching. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I do enjoy watching this movie. I think that it is still fun to watch,
Right.
but it does also start to feel the wear of we are five movies into this franchise now, and we're starting to tread ground in a way that we haven't before. We aren't really changing it up because even now you are going back to the tropes of a movie previous in this franchise. So you're already going back to something that didn't happen that long ago.
Right. And that's the problem. A new beginning. The subtitle of this film is A New Beginning. It's not a new beginning, though. It's a retreaded beginning. A new beginning would have been to explore Tommy as Jason or Tommy as the killer, even if something like that. I almost wonder how this film would have been perceived if now I this is blasphemy. Let's take aside the fact that we love Jason Lives, right? What if the sixth film did actually decide to push forward the Tommy narrative as Tommy as a killer instead? I almost feel like it would have made this film retroactively better because we would have actually seen
Yes.
a progress and like we could actually had that in mind, your concept in mind, how this is all a fever dream. This is all like Tommy's dissension into Jasonhood, so to speak. Um, but again, it ends up not working because they don't commit to any kind of idea, and that's the problem. They don't commit to anything. Like they have the idea floating around. There's a lot of red herrings. They only commit at the end because it's time for the film to stop rolling. They need an ending. That's what it feels like. It's like I'm gonna throw darts at the wall. Okay, we'll make Roy be the killer, and that's it. Doesn't seem like they had any real passion involved with that choice whatsoever. The only passion involves with the idea of Tommy, and at the end of the day, they are so uncommitted and so disastrously falling on Roy as the killer. They had to revert to a Tommy fake out at the end to give it any kind of juice at the end. Because if
Mhm.
that's not in the end, there's no juice in this film at all at the end. It's kind of like this big, all right, fine,
Well,
next.
and it's funny too because you can see the disconnect even with Tom Morga, who plays Jason,
Right.
because he says in the documentary, he goes, I played the character as Jason. I didn't play it as Roy. I didn't he was like, I played it straight as the Jason character and they could just figure it out in editing later, which just goes to show how no one was really on the same page because he just played the character as is, as people knew him. And that's great for us, but the problem is there's no world I think that this character of Roy is committing that hard.
Right. Right.
As weird as that sounds, and it just get I'm so stuck on this now because I've been thinking about it since I watched it last night, but it just also lends credence to the Tommy of it all being the real killer because Tommy in all of this has clearly become obsessed with what Jason did to him. and
Right.
how it hurt him. And I think he would be the one who dons all that stuff and is stalking around just like him, because
Mhm.
that is the kind of thing Tommy would do. And
Mhm.
I think that this ultimately becomes a conversation about what you're right. And I kind of set it up top too. Would this movie be better looked at had it ever properly been followed up on versus had it just not been written off right away?
And I feel like that's also part of the problem of 80s filmmaking, and that I don't decry this decade very often because, quite frankly, some of those creative parts come in. Some of my favorite franchises come from here. At the time of
Mhm.
filmmaking, I actually would love to get back to for the most part, but at the same time, there was a case of, shall we say, flippancy, a case of not worrying about continuity that works for it in some ways. But in some cases, like this could never be done. You can never have like a trilogy. No one would make a Friday the 13th movie now, try to follow up on that ending, and totally retroactively just shut it down. I feel like it would have been looked upon poorly, even at the time, maybe like nowadays, and they wouldn't be able to get away with it. I don't think they would even try it. They would because they try now to have everything's a franchise now. Everything is wrapped up in continuity. Everything's wrapped up with like trying to make things work from the previous film. So I feel like they wouldn't even bother. They couldn't have gotten away with it like they could get away with it now. They could have gotten
Well,
away
and
with it then, I say, rather.
I think you're absolutely right. And I actually think that's why even before all the legal stuff with Friday the 13th got so crazy after 2009, I actually think that's why we never even really got a follow-up to the 2009 film, because I think that they wrote themselves into a box that they did not know how to get out of with the ending.
Hmm.
And they knew that they couldn't just magic it away, unfortunately, these days, right?
Right,
So they
right.
kind of got stuck and went, fuck, how do we even follow up this movie?
And they don't. They don't know how.
And they
Now, like
don't.
back
It just
then, it's okay. We'll make it work. Whatever. Next guy, next man up, and then you get next man up, who's like the director of Halloween 5, or the director of Friday 5, and it's like we're just not going to worry about it. We're going to move on. But it undercuts everything that they're trying to do, and it's a real struggle bus sometimes.
and it's so funny because here we end up with the never like just another parallel between Friday and Halloween,
Mhm.
which I don't think people really understand is how weird that these franchises continue to kind of like meet each other, because arguably this is the Halloween 3 of the Friday franchise in a
Right.
lot of ways. Jason still happens to be in it more than Michael obviously is in Halloween 3, which is pretty much non-existent other than Halloween being on television.
Right.
But at the same time, it looks like a Halloween movie. It feels like a Halloween movie. It's doing all these things, but it's the like the bastard son of all of it because they never followed up on it.
Right.
Everything about it is jettisoned by the time you get to the next one. And this is also its own Halloween 5 because you have a filmmaker who comes on and goes, "I know better than the material. I'm
Yes.
gonna do something different." And
Right.
there's nothing wrong inherently with doing that, so long as you commit to the bit, and no one is like, willing to commit to any of it here,
No, it is
and
not about
that's
commitment at all.
really odd.
Right. And it's funny because, like, you mentioned the Halloween 3 of it all. And of course, Halloween 3 at the time was very critically reviled
Divisive.
because, quite frankly, I mean, like, it was marketed wrong. It was marketed as a Jason. It was a Halloween movie, but it had no Michael Myers in it. It bit the studio in the ass, bit everybody in the ass. But at the same time has been much kinder to it since
Mhm.
then because the further you get along on that road away from the Halloween of it all, people find that they love it, and part of that's because of Tom Atkins. I think that's just my own opinion,
Oh,
but
yeah, because
I
Tom
love Tom
Atkins
Atkins.
rules.
Love Tom Atkins. But as far as this film goes, it didn't take the full bite out of the apple. It didn't fully commit to anything, and like so, therefore, at the end of the day, it just ends up treading water. And like I said before, I kind of keep coming back to that phrase, treading water. At the end of the day, it's inoffensive to the point of like when you think about it back in the day, it just becomes like another Friday film and one that is not one of those favorite Friday films. So it just becomes like the biggest sin of all, which is forgettable and just
And I think what to your point, what's so interesting is that I would argue that that's the biggest problem with 7 and 8 as we get towards those ones too, And as much as I may not love Jason Goes to Hell, and as much as I love Jason X, and there's a lot of fans who don't, but the funny thing about those 2 is they fully commit to the thing that they
For
are
their bit.
doing,
Yeah.
and they really lean on it. Jason X is as campy and as weird and as wonderful as you want it to be when Jason ends up in space.
Right.
Jason Goes to Hell is weird and wild, and the filmmaker thinks he's above the material, but he leans on the bit so
Right.
much that you watch it and you're really kind of vibing with it in that capacity of at least it's doing what it sets out to do. It doesn't mean you have to
1,000%.
like it, but you're enjoying it. But then you look at like Jason Takes Manhattan, which that movie's biggest sin is it is called Jason Takes Manhattan, and then we spend all the time of the movie basically on a cruise ship going there, and
Right.
then we spend 20 minutes in
If that.
Manhattan
If
when
that.
it's Toronto and it doesn't look like Manhattan at all.
Right. Yeah.
This is a problem. You can't put these things out there and then not commit to them.
Right.
And that is
And I'll
what
tell
is
you,
happening.
right up, it's a spoiler alert for this podcast at this point. I think Jason Goes to Hell is probably my least favorite of the Friday films by far, to be honest with you. Probably my least favorite. But at the same time, I respect it a hell of a lot more than I respect this film, quite frankly, because I do think that again, he thinks he's better than material. He's a little bit of a wise ass. The director, I've read interviews with him. He's a cocky SOB. But at the same time, he's trying to do something very different. And when you're 9 films in to a franchise, it's something that you kinda gotta do to reinvent yourself. I appreciate that attempt. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't like the results. I don't love the results. But I'd rather them try that and fail spectacularly than, like, succeed whimpering, kinda like barely get by. And to your point, Jason X is another thing, takes a wild swing. Could you have thought that back in the day? We're living the time of 83, 84. We're watching these Friday the 13th movies. Oh, they're gonna make a film about Jason Voorhees going to outer space in a space station.
Yeah.
I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? And yet, that's one of my favorite films in the franchise because I have so much fun with it. Because
Yeah.
I commit to it. If you commit to it, the audience will potentially commit to it. If you get the audience to commit to it, that's a fun time.
Yeah. And it's funny because, in watching the Crystal Lake Memories, like revisiting it as I've been watching in parts as we go along. So anytime I watch the movie, then I watch the part in the documentary about that specific movie. And it's been really fun, but you can even tell in watching the reactions either from the people involved in making it or the people around it. Like Corey Feldman being vocally like they really fucked it up and didn't lean in isn't really shocking because he clearly also wanted to come back in
Right.
some regard. And so
Right.
he already has his feelings towards this movie,
Right.
but he's also not wrong. But
No.
then you also see like the guys who had written Freddy versus Jason versus Ash,
Right.
and he goes, "This movie is awful. Like
Hmm.
the ending is so bad because it doesn't say anything. Like the killer is Roy. How unsatisfying is that? That dude has like no dialogue in the movie."
Absolutely, and that's the biggest point is that, like, it worked for Pamela. It worked for the character because of how the thing was set up in part 1. That worked. You had a iconic actress of sorts. I mean, she's more iconic now for this role than in anything else, but at the time, an iconic, like, good actress who was known for being, like, goody two shoe type actress and everything else. You're putting her in this role that you introduce her for, and you get that ending like that. It's all kind of maintained to be in Friday the 13th Part 5. You get introduced to Roy in the beginning, barely ever see him again. Then it's revealed to her, like, wait, who is he? Oh,
Yeah,
the paramedic guy. There's a couple of paramedics. Which okay. Oh, so the dark haired one. Okay, not the bubblegum one, not the wire snapping, not the ball. Okay, it's this guy. It's like, who cares? Who cares who this guy is? This guy's a nobody.
yeah, and that becomes the weird problem. And it's funny because I think that that's my big criticism with any who done it right. And
Right.
it's one of my biggest problems with Scream 3. We talked about that a bunch with the Scream 3 killer reveal when we did our podcast about the Scream franchise.
Right.
I've never liked the reveal in Scream 3 because it kind of comes out of left field with a character that you just don't spend enough time with to make it matter.
Right.
Now, granted, if you spend too much time with any one character, it's obviously going to be that that character is the killer in some capacity. So there's not a lot of winning, and I understand that as well. But there's other ways to do it where a character is also not just a piece of the background and revealed to be the killer later, and we're supposed to have a shocked face emoji about it. Like, it
Right.
doesn't make sense in the confines of this movie that this character should matter.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. It's just yeah, this film is very frustrating in so many ways, shapes, or form. And I always go back to when I watch Crystal Lake Memories. It makes it even more frustrating because I keep looking back to Mancuso, and he was stepping away, and he behind it. He even admits the whole time. Like the great thing about it, he admits it. Like this is what we were trying to do. This is what the screenwriters wanted to do. What the director wanted to do, because we were kind of backed ourselves, and we felt like we backed ourselves into a corner. And it's not like they wanted to set out to make this movie a bad movie. Or nobody sets out to make a bad movie. Nobody sets to make out
No.
a crap related movie. But unfortunately, when you could have great intentions, you could have ideas in your head like, okay, we want to try to take this in a new direction. But at the end of the day, the results just didn't work out. They had to reinvent themselves to a degree. Maybe we should thank it though, because maybe we wouldn't have gotten six the way it is. Maybe we wouldn't gotten the meta comedy at that point, because it almost felt like there was no more recourse for Jason to do except for to turn a little meta, turn a little bit of that comedy up. Because at that point, where else could you have gone unless you decided to commit to Tommy as the villain, and they obviously decided they couldn't do that.
I almost wish that they had. And what's fascinating is I see a world where you can still get to a Jason Lives with Tommy also being a killer, and then you end up with Jason versus Tommy, killer versus killer, which I also could have thought was kind of fun and fascinating. Like, imagine that movie.
With Tommy, yes. Tommy's the only person. The problem we would have gotten out of it is they couldn't commit to it. So it would have been a case of like a Roy type Jason versus Jason, and then it becomes stupid. Then it becomes like,
Yeah, well,
okay, so
I agree with, because they never
it's
would have
Tommy.
fully committed to it. But you know what would have been kind of interesting, actually? So say the next movie starts, and this is going to sound like bad, like weird bad fan fiction, but just kind of hear me out, because there is an idea there to play with it, that Tommy Jason starts going after the girls that are the final girls that have survived,
Hmm.
and he starts to hunt them down, only for the real Jason to like emerge, and it becomes like a battle basically of Tommy trying to break out of the Jason of it all, and this hold that it has on him, and then actually trying to become the hero again when he is also succumbing to Jason. And I think that
Right.
there would have been an interesting angle there where it's him and the final girls versus this Jason, where they're trying to like break him of, you survived this, so did we. We can't let you go like down this paranoid rabbit hole and become the killer. And then they
Right.
end up having to work together to save him basically from the Jason as he reemerges.
That's that's intriguing. I mean, to actually, it's funny. It kind of
God,
feels like it
imagine
sounds like
that.
a yeah. It sounds like a comic book idea.
Yeah.
In the best way possible. I mean that I don't mean that in any slight way, shape, or form. It almost feels like something they could do nowadays that they've never have dreamed of doing back in the 80s.
No, I know. Yeah, I think you're right. I think my imagination of the things that we have gotten since, and like my time around horror and the space, has made me do a lot of wondering and what ifs and
Right.
things of that nature. And so that's kind of where my mind starts to wander. And then I see the potential of, there was your follow up,
Right. Yeah,
you know?
that could have been. That's something that, funny enough, like that could still happen. That's something that you could do. And the way nowadays we have a lot of these legacy sequels, so to speak. And I feel like we are retroactively cherry picking stuff. And I think that necessarily that's a good thing. I mean, talk all
I
you
do
want about
too.
the David Gordon Green Halloween trilogy. You can talk, whatever you want to say about it, whatever. But the idea that they had Halloween 2018, which is like, we're just having Halloween one and that's it. And we're going to go from there. Like, it just makes a lot of sense to be able to do that because there's a lot of crap in a lot of these sequels at this point. The continuity's been built up. So let's just like cherry pick what we want and say, hey, let's have Friday the 13th part 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to start now with an adult Tommy and like do what you said. He's going to attack all the legacy sequel girls who have the final girls who have survived, bring them up. And we can actually do that now with an older Tommy and older Jason. And make it work. I think it could work well and be a spectacularly fun movie. Except here, hear me out, guys. Whoever's hearing this, don't plan a trilogy out of it. Don't plan a trilogy out of it. Plan one single movie. And if it works well, then you see if you want to continue from there. Because quite frankly, I don't understand what we are doing. This is a rant that probably should have taken place before the film began. What are we doing with The Exorcist? Why are we bothering? Like, it's biting them in the ass now. They had, what, $430 million to develop a trilogy, and this first film is blowing chunks, and David Gordon Green wants out. And he didn't, obviously, they didn't figure out the problems they had with Halloween. Now, you and I love Halloween Kills. And Halloween Ends, whatever. Overall, it is what it is. They never should have made trilogies. And they went for it again. The Exorcist itself is never a film that should have been sequelized very often. And we're going to make a trilogy out of it.
Yeah, here's what I'm going to do my soapbox real quick. This is a soapbox that you and I have, you heard me talk about this a lot, and I'm a little perplexed by the whole thing. There's like this weird contingent online right now of people who are super shocked by the fact that this new Exorcist sequel by a filmmaker who made very divisive Halloween films is not doing that well critically or even commercially right now. And I'm trying to understand why people are surprised by this, because here's a filmmaker who I actually think, number one, stop saying to get David Gordon Green out of horror. I'm not really understanding that. Like, he's clearly a very good horror filmmaker. You don't have to like a lot of what he's doing, but his ideas are in the right place, and he's actually very good at what he does. Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends all have fantastic bits, have fantastic scares. They're still well-made movies, even if you don't like a lot of what's happening underneath. Fine, fair, whatever. But he's a good filmmaker.
I agree.
But this guy made 3 very divisive Halloween films, right? The Exorcist franchise as a whole is not exactly known for its startling great quality outside of the original. You can argue that the third one's a great movie, but it was not exactly like a runaway hit. It wasn't exactly beloved when it opened. It has gained a cult following since. It might be like the pinnacle child of cult sequels in film franchises in the horror genre. It's one of the Mount Rushmore of that, probably. But like The Exorcist is a franchise not exactly doing well critically in the past, not exactly doing commercially well in the past outside of the original.
Right.
Really unsure why people are super surprised that a super divisive filmmaker who is also with a super divisive property made a super divisive sequel.
Right.
What are we doing here? Why is this super shocking? I don't understand. Like, people are so up in arms about this and weirded out by it and calling for David Gordon Green's head. And it's like, where were all you super fans of The Exorcist before this? And I'm not saying that it just feels like faux outrage to be mad because you love the original, but you're also overlooking the fact that The Exorcist has notoriously always had bad sequels.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, let me real quick here, just to finish this, because I'm feeling so mouthy about it all. Universal, what the fuck were you and Blumhouse thinking, spending $400 million on developing 3 of these films out the gate? Why did you not spend like $100 million maybe at that point on one movie and then decide if you want to do more? It's like, let's wait and see how the new film is received before we make these grand,
bring back 80s ideas in that fashion. The idea of the 80s films, they made a movie, they saw how it did. Was it profitable? We'll move on forward. That is not how they do things today. DC fucked it up. The monster universe fucked it up because they're committing to these large franchises. There is no franchise in the world, honestly, standing that I could see go, okay, I could see committing to a trilogy now. I don't get it. Maybe Star Wars, because of the idea that Star Wars were trilogy back in the day, maybe they could do it. Maybe the Lord of the Rings could try it. Otherwise, though, honestly speaking, like, don't bother. Just make a movie. Make the best movie possible. If you want to lay seeding groundwork for a sequel potentially, Do it in a subtle fashion and do it where it's not obvious. And then let's see what happens. And if it works, great, you can move on. And if it doesn't, guess what? You can move on and not worry about it and not have sunk $300 million into a property that's now going to end up eating shit.
Well, it's funny too, because like, you know who's doing really well with this right now? Lionsgate.
Yeah.
They've really walked back the whole Hunger Games prequel, like multi-film trilogy thing, because that Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes or whatever is coming out in November.
Right.
I remember initially they had kind of announced that it was going to be a multi-part series. They
I
were
heard
going
that
to
too.
do at least 2 or 3 movies, but they really started to walk that back, and they're clearly only making a single film that if it does well, then we will expand more. John Wick, they never went in on John Wick other than let's do one at a time. Remember, they were even going to do 4 and 5
Yep.
back to back, and then they pulled back and said, no, just do a 4th film, and then we will worry about potentially doing a 5th.
And that's the way it should
I
be.
think
That's
it
the way it should be.
helps. And
Mhm.
it's right, and it's the way to do it. I mean, Sony was smart. I reference this movie a lot on here more than I anticipate pretty much ever, but Bad Boys for Life was a perfect example of Sony being like, "We wanted to do another one. We were hoping to, like, reignite the franchise, but we're not gonna announce anything outside of a 3rd film
Right.
until we see how the box office does," and now they're getting a 4th film out of it
Right.
because the 3rd one made so much money. So there is this world where all of this could have been avoided had you not tried to walk into a corner and go, "We're gonna do 3 of these."
And that's the problem
And
because studios see a couple of different problems. We have studios who see green big bucks that see a Marvel Cinematic Universe, which ends up with Endgame being over $1 billion, being critically successful, being a iconic series. Audiences are eating it up, and audiences feed it back to it as well because now audiences expect this. I want this storyline with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. I want this epic storyline with a beginning, a middle, and ending. And they want it over the course of a couple movies now because that's what they expect. That's what they've been kind of brought up expecting at this point instead of saying, give me a good film with its own beginning, middle, and ending, and then we can
yeah,
have something else develop from there. And if you get a successful film or two, maybe then you can commit to a franchise. Maybe then you can commit to a trilogy. Even I don't love the idea even then, but at least you're on the right ground path if you got this kind of bucks going. Okay, I got the good first film. Second film does really well. Okay, let's have an end game in mind. Maybe it's over the course of 2 or 3 films because we have already built up that kind of audience and that kind of commitment from both sides of the fence. Right now, we have the commitment from the studio side of things, and the audience isn't there. And all of a sudden, the audience falls, and the studio's like, "Oh shit, now what?"
I mean, honestly, that was the thing that I worried about with Dune originally
Mhm.
before Dune opened because we
Mhm.
all knew, like, the writing really was they had never really hidden it, that they were splitting the first book into 2.
Right,
And
right,
how much of a watching the first Dune, I was terrified that watching that movie would feel incomplete, and it sure as hell does.
yep,
And I was even more worried if they didn't commit, but Lionsgate had upfront committed to it. And then, honestly, as weird as it sounds, COVID might have been the best thing that happened to it because
mhm,
it weirdly kind of catapulted the movie on streaming and at the theater, and it did well enough at the theaters while also getting a lot of play at home.
right,
I think it might have been the best case scenario for that to get us Dune 2,
yeah.
because imagine if you would just watch Dune and we never got a sequel and it just ends with Timothy Chalamet standing in the desert.
That sucked. It would suck so bad. It sucks so
Right.
bad.
And that's
Um,
I really need people to stop overcommitting to stuff before they're ready to do that or not. Because
Specifically in the horror franchise, specifically in horror genre rather, because quite frankly, a Dune is an epic sci-fi thing. You have a premier filmmaker. You have people like that. I can almost understand it more. When you have a horror genre, the horror genre are low budget, high profit movies. That's how you work, and that's how they work.
you
But they're
mean The
also
Nun 2
not
making money isn't shocking?
exactly. You put the Nun 2 out there, film that we reviewed and trashed pretty much. Not our favorite in the franchise, but we're not surprised it's making money because it's in a successful horror franchise and horror makes
I
money.
cannot understand the conversation around this on the online film Twitter space that clearly cannot get out of its own bubble and understand that people love the Conjuring films, and specifically Valak as a character has become a horror icon,
Yeah.
and they're somehow surprised that the highest grossing Conjuring film, The Nun, that made over $300 million at the box office. Somehow it
most profitable, right? The most profitable, not the highest gross, the
Yeah.
most profitable, right? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, whatever. But the point being, it also got a sequel that made over $230 million at the box office. Like, why are any of you surprised? How can you be so outside of They keep trying to say, well, it doesn't make sense. I don't see anyone talking about it. You're clearly not paying attention to like outside your bubble. It is
Right.
such a great reminder of we need to get off the internet and start to understand like the people around us. Cause I fell into that camp with Avatar.
Same.
I really
Absolutely did.
Yeah, I admit, I really thought that maybe there were not that many fans of that original movie because it didn't seem like it had left as much of a hit on pop culture. Something that Valak has done way more, in my opinion,
Yeah.
overall, as a horror icon type character. Valak has left a bigger mark in my mind than Avatar overall on pop culture. But I'm also wrong in maybe saying that because Avatar 2 is still like the second highest grossing movie of all time now after
And
the original.
it's shocking. It's shocking. It has to do with obviously premier filmmakers still make their waves, and that's not a pun. That's pun intended for Avatar. But
Wow.
also,
Wow.
but also, I mean, it's also a concept of like it has a bred for theaters kind of mentality with pushing things forward, special effects wise, and everything else. There's a lot more to be said about that kind of film than the Nun, for example. But I don't disagree with your concept that Valak has become a probably one of the more successful horror icons recently. At a time where, like back in the day, horror icons were like a dime a dozen. Like you throw something out the wall, you get a Jason, you get a Freddy, you get a Michael, you get a
Chucky,
Leatherface, you get a Chucky, you get nowadays kind of like
Pennywise.
Pennywise. You don't have these horror icons. What are our horror icons recently? Like what the Happy
Jigsaw.
Death Day, the baby doll thing. But even Jigsaw is from a different age. I consider it. It's almost more than that's like early 2000s.
I would still
Like,
consider that a modern horror icon, though, comparative
yeah,
to the others, just because, the fact that, to our point of all this, right? Saw X just did pretty huge at the box office similarly because they treated it as a legacy sequel to
right,
the movies in that franchise that people really like.
right.
And they brought Tobin Bell back, and look at how well received and how popular it's been.
Right.
It is the highest rated critically film in that entire franchise.
Who would have thought that going on? And I have not seen that, so I don't know. I have to eventually sit
I
down and
haven't
watch
either
them
yet.
all.
I haven't had a chance yet. So,
Um,
but the point is in all of that is like horror icons do exist, and the Nun was no different. Like they
think about
wanted
the
it to be
2010s,
Annabelle.
though. Think about the 2010s. Who are our horror icons of the 2010s?
Happy Death Day would have counted if the second one hadn't,
The
cratered,
babyface
I feel
thing
like.
is kind of iconic, kinda. Maybe Megan kinda has gotten into our pop culture a
Yeah.
little bit. Like, and that's
Annabelle and the
Megan
Nun would
honestly
really
is
be the
a
only
kind of a
two.
knockoff, and I mean this in the best way possible, the most love possible. I like Megan a lot, but Megan is basically a Chucky descendant to a degree.
Yeah. Which
Like
is funny because it had already had its own too.
legacy
Because
sequel,
Child's
right?
Play had
Absolutely.
had its well, not just that, but like that like weird reboot. Remember the
Yeah,
one with Mark Hamill?
yeah, that's right, absolutely. But as far as that goes, so I gotta say, I think Valak might be our most iconic. Maybe Annabelle, maybe Annabelle a little bit more than Valak potentially, but either way, both from the
And
Conjuring
then
franchise.
and then obviously the new Pennywise off of the original too. I would consider them two different interpretations, but Pennywise had already existed.
Right, that's it.
But
I mean, like I'm talking about the
yeah,
original
yeah, yeah.
icons in a way.
Yeah.
So
It's a weird conversation
yeah,
because and wow, we're having this all in the middle of this Friday podcast because it kind of lends to it in a weird way because so much of what we're talking about can be pointed at here in a weird way of we're looking back at it 40 years later almost.
right.
But there's some weird stuff in this movie's existence that points to a lot of the misgivings and mishandlings of horror film sequels even now.
Yep, absolutely.
And
You're
that's
absolutely right.
fascinating.
There's nothing in this film is nothing else if not fascinating. Quite frankly, it is fascinating. Um, and it's all again. It shows hindsight being 2020. I could see myself even like I wish I could go back to 1984, sit down there like a fly on the wall, and watch this development, watch them come up with this idea, and I wonder if I would have even agreed with it at the time. Because like I feel like without the obviously of seeing how it developed, we didn't know it was going to develop. On paper, it kind of sounds like an interesting idea. Okay, so we don't have Jason. We're gonna tease the idea. We'll bring it back to its roots because everybody always says, "Let's bring things back to their roots." This is what it tried to
That's
do.
always that has been a
Catchphrase.
calling card of Hollywood catchphrases and keywords since the beginning of time, I feel like. Because you know how the grounded reboot was after Batman Begins, and like everyone
Mhm.
was chasing that from Nolan was the we're gonna make it realistic, we're gonna ground it like Batman
Yep.
Begins, we're gonna ground the movie. Or then the reboots, we're rebooting the movies, Jurassic World, it's a reboot of the franchise. No, it's a sequel. Yeah, but it's a fresh new beginning. So it's a sequel set in the same world. Well, no, but it's a reboot.
Oh.
Is it though?
Mhm.
No. And even then they've walked back since and they've just said that no, the Jurassic Park sequel, like the Jurassic World sequels are just that. They're sequels, but that was the hot keyword. Even The Force Awakens was a reboot at the time.
Yeah. It's really it's not even that's the problem. Is like they toss this word reboot around as really repackaging. It's like we know that there's some baggage with Jurassic Park, so we're not making Jurassic Park. We're making Jurassic World because it's
Right.
a repack. We're putting some shininess on it. We're sprucing it up. We're putting the bow on it and everything else. Force Awakens, yeah, we're going to tell you the Star Wars Force Awakens. We're going to tap into that original Star Wars trilogy feel, but it's not a Star Wars prequel or sequel. It's not even talking. They
That's
even
why it
like
doesn't
push
have
out
an
episode
episode
7.
number in front of it.
But I'm saying episode 7, not episode 7. It's just the Force Awakens. We all know it's episode 7, and we all talk about 7, 8, 9. I don't talk about it as now as anything else besides that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Absolutely right. This is and Friday the 13th tried to. I feel like Friday the 13th almost tried to do that with this film, but unfortunately, they did it a year after the final chapter. So the new beginning didn't have time enough to make it. If this film had made like 10 years later, they would have pitched this as a reboot. Like,
Yeah.
it's not Jason
100%.
anymore.
So, as we keep talking about this, we've kind of been talking about the movie as a whole, which is so fascinating. The one thing that is wild to me looking at this now, though, even in like the hindsight of it all, this movie is a year later, to your point, very undercooked, and yet it has maybe the biggest cast of characters to point in this franchise. And that is such a weird thing because all the characters, like I said, they kind of seem interesting, but no one is ever able to actually grow or be interesting because there are so many characters that are made to be red herrings. We don't spend time with anyone enough for you to actually care about the characters. Like that's one of my things about 4 that I like so much. I like the characters. They don't
No.
just feel like slasher archetypes.
The key word you said there, key words I should say, is red herrings. Because what's a red herring? A red herring is a character that is potentially the killer in a whodunit. He's like the possible person. Well, what can't you do in a with red herring? You can't dive deep with them because you got to kind of keep them mysterious. And I kind of got the
Right.
idea like, oh, maybe this is the killer. If you dive too deep into any of these characters, and they all of a sudden become less available as red herrings. And that becomes the problem. When everybody's a red herring, you can't get deep with anybody. And instead, they don't allow you to get deep with anybody because they just sprinkle in all these different groups. Like before we had Friday 13th, like last movie, we had the Corey Feldman's family and we had the other group of teens. They had the outsider twins that came in, but really they're all one big group. In this case, you have the camp, this camp of mental health people. You got the rednecks. You have these 2 random greasers. You have Demon and his girlfriend. You have like it's just this whole bunch of different people
Plus
going
the
around.
cop,
Plus the cops.
plus
Yeah,
the
another
mayor,
100%.
plus there's all these things happening, and it's so funny because you look at it and you go, there's just so much fucking stuff happening in this movie, and it's 90 minutes. So
Right.
you spend not enough time with any of them. And what's funny too is here's another hindsight is 2020 thing, but love the note of they've been wanting to do Jason in a hospital for so long. And they
Right.
kind of do it in the last movie at the very beginning.
Right.
So what do? All right, well, the camp they're at is actually for mental health patients now and for wayward lost children. So it's our hospital, but it's still in the middle of the
Yeah.
woods. they finally found a way to do it, but they just keep it at a camp, and you're like, are you kidding me right now? Like, we're not just gonna go to, like this becomes the problem with this franchise in particular, as much as I enjoy it, they never move it far enough away from Crystal Lake until Jason X
Right.
that it feels like that you're trying something super different and like super new.
Right.
I would love to see a Jason movie with Jason fully set loose in a place that is not what we would be used to seeing.
Right.
And I think that this movie really had the potential to do that. Like, imagine if this had been a halfway house in the middle of the city or something.
Right. No, that's a good call. I mean, let's be honest. I'll be honest. I'm gonna pull a card here. Jason Takes Manhattan attempts to. It definitely attempts
I
to.
would argue, though, at the same time, yes, but no, because the movie spends most of its time on a boat. And what is a boat?
Camp on
It's
the lake, I
basically
guess.
just a cabin on the water.
That's fair, I guess.
You
Um,
know what I'm saying? Like, you still end up in a weird, precocious, like, kind of still camping vibe, as weird as that sounds.
we'll definitely
And
get
I
to that.
like a lot of Jason Takes a Cruise, as that movie shall effectively be known. Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes a Cruise is a lot more fun than people give it credit for at times, but it is also clearly where the movie franchise is running out of steam.
Yeah. And that's why Jason Goes to Hell comes next, and a wild swing that one is. But we're not there yet. We still have a little way to go. A couple more movies left before we go to there.
Did you
Now we
so
go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I
Age
did
before
trust me.
Beauty.
Oh. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was gonna say, like, it's funny. We've been talking for about an hour and a half, hour 15 now, and we didn't begin with our rant. We hit our rant in the middle of the movie. We've also spoken at length, more in a general case about this
Yeah.
film. We usually go through in much more details, and I do have a lot of notes on some details. I don't know the time to want to break down some of these actual specific
Well,
moments of the
actually,
film, or
that's
is
what I
that
was
just
gonna start talking with you about, is that
right?
I
Okay,
feel like we've been kinda hammering away at the
circling
bigger
around.
issues with the movie, and I'd like to zone in a little now and talk about we've been talking about the cast of characters and things, and that's kind of what I wanna dive into is the characters and just their existence in this world because it needs to be talked about of the John Shepherd as Tommy of it all.
Oh yeah,
This is a very specific performance, to
it
say
is
the
a very
least.
committed performance for sure.
Um,
Um, if you
and
watch
just in
the
general,
crust,
there's a lot happening around it. Like the camp characters are so fascinating to me because again, they all feel like characters I actually want to spend time with, but we never get to know that out of two scenes. And there's just
mhm,
like weirdness in all of it. Like the stuttering dude who we'd never see grow as a character who tries to come on to this girl only to have her laugh in his face and end up dying. And you're like, "What? Why is
it,
this a sequence in the movie?"
because basically they didn't. When you don't have enough time to really dive deep into characters, you give them like a cartoonish almost characteristic, and that becomes
Yeah,
their identity. We have the stutterer, the nervous stutterer. We have the dancer. We have the rednecks.
the
We
punk rocker,
have the punk rocker. We have the punk rocker. We have
the two
the
horny
gang,
teenagers.
the hornballs. We have the gang member with Demon and his girlfriend. We have like the doctor and the mother of the camp. They're all like very much classified instead of being people. They're just like archetypes. They're just very much check off. Okay, that's who this person is because we can't get to know them any better. So then when we get them, when they do get killed, it's kind of like, okay, so next move. All right, they're basically Jason fodder. I don't care when they die, and that's the problem. That's a problem for the film, to be completely honest.
It's funny though, it never doesn't kill me though whenever I see Miguel Nunez Jr. in this, just because to me, but like I'll always remember him obviously from being in like Return of the Living Dead and Action Jackson because he was actually he's a character actor that I've known for a long time. But the
Okay.
weird one for me is I've always he's in Leprechaun 4,
Hmm.
which is when the Leprechaun goes to space the first time. funny enough.
First time, the
But
first time.
also, he's in the live action Scooby Doo movie
He is,
in the
yeah.
first one, and I used to watch that movie all the time growing up as a kid. And so anytime I go back and watch this, I'm immediately weirdly transported back to that.
I don't
And
blame
then
you.
later, because of the time when I was watching a lot of sitcoms, I watched Joey when Joey was on, when Friends had ended, and he was in
Okay.
that too.
I vaguely remember that now. Yeah, I didn't watch Joey very much, but I do remember him being in there. Yeah,
It's just so
absolutely.
wild, man.
Yeah, no, he's actually done a lot of different stuff that I like to. I mean, he's in a couple different. He's also in Lethal Weapon 3, I think it is. Right, he's a gang member, Lethal Weapon 3. He's in
Yes.
Street Fighter.
Mhm.
In Street Fighter, which I love. He was in like a lot of Eddie Murphy stuff. Life, he was in Life. With Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence. He's in a Nutty Professor 2. He's in a lot of movies, and and I can understand why, because he's, quite frankly, he's a very charismatic actor, very great at what he does, um, and I love having him in here. And it's funny. I feel like he has probably some of the most defining moments in the movie, and he's not in it very long, comparatively
No.
speaking.
No,
But
but he still stands out, which
right,
just makes me laugh. He's a good actor, man. I've always
he
liked
is,
him.
yeah. I will say the person who stands out most, and the person I think we both mentioned, our favorite character in the whole film is Reggie.
Shavar Ross.
Reggie, man.
Reggie. Reggie.
Mentioned, who, by the
Reggie.
way, I almost feel like Reggie was put in the film as like, because we talked about how Tommy gets recast to John Shepard. John Shepard looks nothing like Tommy Jarvis, like Corey Feldman.
No.
Completely different. He's bulkier. The idea, according to the film, was they wanted to find somebody who's bulky who could fight Jason and look believable
Which
against
is
Jason.
such a weird, again, choice.
Yeah, again,
Considering.
you're like, go with so you're basing your entire film or entire character on one part of the visual instead of on the character you've already developed.
Also, uh, remember how we talk about Friday the 13th ripping off Halloween a lot or homaging it? Boy, we really go as far as Tommy staring out a window outside and Jason standing underneath a tree, just like Michael when Laurie looks out the window in Halloween. Really? Like, we're not
Absolutely.
even trying to hide that at this
Oh,
point.
and by the way, Tom Morgan actually does play Jason there, because that's the one we got to think about. Jason in Tommy's vision is the real Jason. Therefore, so the real Jason
Yeah.
does make appearances, at least in your visions. But anyway, John Shepard is so different, but I kind of feel like they tried to, like, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but they tried to put little things in the movie that remind you of Corey Feldman's character. Like they
Yeah.
give Tommy his mask still, which we talked about before. Like, why does he have his mask still? Well, because you need to have that connection to Tommy. I think Reggie is exactly like a reminder of remember this guy? This is what Tommy was. This is what Tommy was as a kid. He scares him with the spiders. He's got the energy. He got the friendliness in a way. He's kind of like a little bit of sarcastic vibe to him. Reggie is basically Tommy part 2 to a degree. Because we know you like Tommy from the first one. We know you like that young kid energy. We're gonna give it to you again, just in a Redux format. Luckily, Reggie makes it his own. Like, so this character, it could have been faded to have been like nothing but a Redux, nothing but like a false, like a wannabe kind of thing. But he makes it his own because he's very charismatic as a young kid himself. But that's what I think the initial thought process was.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And it's so funny because even looking towards the next movie, as much as I like when you look at Tommy Jarvis played by Tom Matthews at that point, Tom Matthews also doesn't look a lot like Feldman either, but I think he plays the character more like him. The version of that Tommy Jarvis, and this is probably more for the next episode than this one, it feels like a continuation of the character had he grown up.
Closer.
Like he has that weird eccentric side, but I kind of do get interested in what John Shepard is trying to do. Because there is a side to this that, again, if the movie had committed more to the bit on what it was trying to do with Tommy, I think I'd like it more because the weird, brooding Jason performance is fascinating.
Yeah.
It really
John
is.
Shepard
In the
is committing to the bit. He's committing to the bit
Yeah.
that we all kind of wanted to commit to. If they had done the idea of following up from 4 the way we all thought he should have followed up, this actually would have been a very good performance from Jason, or from Tommy rather, as Jason, the Tommy Jason, so to speak. But because it doesn't, because it half-asses itself, and because it's revealed at the end that it's not, then it becomes like, well, what are we doing here? Like when Tommy becomes like the kind of hero towards the end, it's like, so he's the hero again, and then they followed up with him becoming Jason again. It's like, what are we doing here? What are we doing this for? Like, it
Still convinced,
undercuts John
man.
Shepard.
It totally does, and I'm convinced that this movie is in dream sequence. Like, other than when I really believe that, like, once he gets to the camp, it's all like a hazy dream in his head. And I think, like, notice how he's never around when all the killings are happening. He's always weirdly staring at a Jason or something like weird. I kind of think it's all just in his head.
This is
I,
all your imagination. I love it. I love it. I love that.
you know
It's that
what?
way
It makes
'cause
me appreciate the movie
I
more. I'll
agree.
give it
I
that.
agree. Because not to dash like not to throw cold water on your dream side. The idea why he's not around is because they're using him as a red herring. That's the idea. They want
Stop
you to think
it.
it might be.
Let it.
That's the
Let me
idea.
have this, you bastard. Let me have this. I'm trying. It's one of those things where almost have to do it because it makes me like the movie more than just being mad that
Yeah.
it never commits to the bit.
Let's
Because
look
the
at
movie
this.
is telling me, like, it feels like the movie is beating me over the head that it should be Tommy, because that's
Right.
where the last movie ends. And then it commits to it again at the end. So I have to believe that the middle of it is all just a weird dream sequence that they didn't want to say that Tommy was really the villain, but he really was the entire time.
I mean, let's look at how this goes as far as like how many red herrings are there? And you got Tommy as a red herring. I think you got to put Pam as a red herring just because she's named Pam after Pamela Voorhees, and she's the mother of the camp. So that's got to be a red herring. I think Fedora is a red herring. Of course, you call Fedora because he plays Fedora in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He has a little bit of bigger role in this film as the doctor who heads up the camp. But I think he's a red herring at some points. Roy is not a red herring, but he's treated as a red herring because it does when Roy sees his son, if you watch the film, it does linger on him a little bit where he gets a little wide-eyed and can't quite function like he normally would. Who else? Like, there's others who feel like I think you could say that the rednecks at one point were potentially a red herring because they're the ones who want to kill everybody in the camp anyway.
Yeah.
There's just so many red herrings in here.
Well, and the red herrings of the parents is almost, or the rednecks is so weird because that's also leaning on the fact that we knew that Pamela was a redneck hating teenage hating woman. And
Mm-hmm.
so like they're leaning on that again and you're like, really? Like you're really leaning on that again? And her son, the discount Randy Quaid of it all, is such an odd choice because you have discount Randy Quaid. You also have discount Lou Ferrigno in the Roy character. Like Roy looks and sounds like a discount version of him in a lot of ways to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
This movie's entire cast, even the very first like murder at the camp looks like a young Paul Walter Hauser. I immediately texted you and I was like, that would have been him 20 years ago if he was making this movie, like in acting then.
Yeah.
There's all these characters that feel like characters, and I almost feel bad for him. That character's entire existence is weird and gross, and it gives me weird skeevies.
Young Paul Walter Hauser.
Yeah.
Well, also the funny thing is, you know who that is also? It's really Shelley again.
Yeah.
It's like a retread of Shelley, the curly-haired, slightly larger build guy. Of course, played by Dominic Braschi, who's actually a director in of his own mind. He actually directed some films of his own. I had another conversation with Lego about this movie that she really liked in there. What's the name of the movie? It was it's one of those films that sounds like a lot of the other films. Where's the guy? I gotta look up his.
Well, that's really kind of the thing with a lot of these. Like, I hate to say it that way, but a lot of our favorite slashers and stuff kind of sound like
similar names.
Other slasher movies.
Yeah, it's like it's not to be confused with Rock and Roll Nightmare. What is it? Hard Rock Nightmare. That's the one. Not Rock and Roll Nightmare. It's Hard Rock Nightmare from 1988. He directed. Yeah, no, but he does his job well. But he's a character that's supposed to bring out disgust in the audience. which is really kind of sad, and it's a sign of the '80s because he's a little bit chunkier. I mean, and so it comes off in like this kind of like almost like
It's
fat
mean
phobic
spirited.
way, and very mean spirited. But at the same
He
time,
doesn't
it's
know
like the
how to
guy
clean up out his mouth. Like he's just got chocolate on his mouth all the
and
time.
his hands, and he gets on the
Yeah.
laundry and stuff, and it's like, oh god. But it is, and that actually describes the film as a whole. I feel like the whole film has this undertone of mean spiritedness to it. And that's probably
Well,
because that's the way it was made.
yeah, and that again, that's the thing that people point to with this movie in particular is how sleazy and gross and exploitive it feels. This
Mhm.
feels way more like a grindhouse movie at times because
Yeah,
of that. Um,
100%.
and not like for the kids at home who are like, "You mean that movie that Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez made?" No, not like Grindhouse the movie, but like Grindhouse
House
movies.
movies. Yeah.
Yeah, which was what that Grindhouse movie was based on, was like those 60s and 70s exploitation films that you were going down to like the seediest part of the city to watch, women in cages and like movies like that.
Right,
Um,
absolutely.
there was a lot of that sort of thing going on. And I'll be honest with you, Thanksgiving is coming out next month, and I'm a little mad that like Eli Roth kind of got rid of all, if you've seen the trailer, like all the grime and the exploitive nature of it is gone. And I was like, well,
Mm,
why are you doing that? Like that makes it a lot less fun to me. The
right.
point of you doing a Thanksgiving movie should have been that it should have had the aesthetic of that. And I'm genuinely really bummed out about it, but I'm also like, well, it's Eli Roth. I shouldn't be that shocked. He's not like a great filmmaker.
No.
So I'm not a big fan of Eli Roth, just kind of period.
I'm I get that. I'm in kind of more of indifferent to him. I actually like his spunk. I like his I think he's got a little bit of charisma. He kind of made a name for himself really quickly out of the gate. But it's just not been able to sustain it. But I get what you're saying. I'm not that intrigued by that trailer I saw either. I was kind of surprised at how I wanted to like it, but didn't quite tick any boxes for me. Um, One thing I need to bring up before because I forgot to bring this up earlier. Interestingly enough, we have for the first time no recap.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It just
Um,
starts.
it just kind of starts, and I don't know if I like it or not. Like I kind of almost feel like I complained about it as the longer it got because like it was like 8 9 minutes, and then last time was like 3 minutes. It was like, oh, nice tight recap, which was nice. As a new beginning, I feel like we almost needed a more of a recap here than anything else, to be honest with you. But
I would make I make the argument because it's a new beginning, we don't necessarily need it. But the problem is that at that point, you're also now languishing in the fact that, is it actually a new beginning? Have we actually like painted ourselves into a corner even more? Because
right,
it probably needs the recap off of where it came from.
right,
But if you do that, then you're just reminding the audience the entire time that Jason isn't in the movie. Except
that's
then
true.
you've now just reminded the audience that Jason's no longer really in the movie because the entire movie opens with Jason being pulled out of the ground, which
Right.
oddly enough is how the next film also opens.
I was funny. Like I mean, why I had to know this, right? Because I've seen these movies a bunch of times, but watch this. I was like, really hit home. I'm like, wow, we're really beginning this the same way this is going to begin next time, basically. Although I guess you could
Yeah,
also argue that the beginning Tommy dream sequence is almost like a recap without being a recap. It's like there was this kid Tommy. He obviously fought Jason. Jason's dead, but now we're scared that he might be back to life. There's your
yeah.
recap. I guess. I guess it works in that fashion when it comes down to it. So
I
forget.
just think it's also jarring for us because we both think that Corey Feldman gets shafted in it. Like
Yeah.
it's just such a non-use of his version of Tommy. And I think
Should
that frankly kind of sucks.
and I guess like my point is if you're gonna have this adult Tommy or whatever, should you even bother to have Corey Feldman in the movie at all?
No.
Because it shows you this is what we had. This is the guy you like, and he's not going to be in the movie anymore. Yes.
Yeah, and again, there just seems to be a disconnect between the material, John Shepard, and the character of Tommy altogether. And like again, his performance doesn't at all match Corey Feldman's
No,
performance. Even
no,
in the prologue, it doesn't match what Corey Feldman is doing in it. I
nope.
mean, sure they have him have no dialogue again, but that's lame. And
Mhm.
that just really undercuts the character because Feldman is notoriously a very motor mouth type character in everything you watch.
Right. Absolutely. Um, So yeah, I agree. I think we should not have him at all. It's not worth having him there. It's just a star power. I feel like it must have been a star power thing. I don't think it had anything to do with the story wise. I don't think they needed to have him in there story wise. I think it's kind of like, well, he's a big deal. He's in Gremlins. He's got Goonies coming out. Let's slap him on there to remind people that he's part of this franchise. But then it just doesn't make sense because then you're cutting him out, and it's like, why would you do that to your audience? Remind yourself
Yeah.
of the better of, and no ill intent towards John Shepard. Why remind you of the better Tommy, and then proceed to have him replaced by this other Tommy throughout afterwards? Doesn't make
I
sense.
genuinely yeah, and I genuinely don't blame John Shepard for the performance.
No,
I again, I really just blame it on a misread of the material, or not even a misread. I read it as a read, the correct read on John Shepard's part. This is how I should be playing the character coming off of what happened in the last movie. But
I
the
think it's poor
director
direction.
not stepping in, yeah,
Yeah,
and going, "Hey, don't play the role like this. We really need you to play it more like this." But it's also the director going, "But if we play it like this, everyone's gonna think he's the killer the entire time, and that's what we
right.
want," which is ultimately also kind of the biggest issue that the movie never commits to that.
And that's the thing too. We don't know who this guy is. We don't know who the killer is. I don't even think the director really knew who the killer was. I think the whole time through there's no real mindset. It's like I think that's why there's so many red herrings. Like he kind of like set up this filming. All right, you know what? Let's just film everybody. We'll leave lingering shots on people. We'll let people know, and then at the end we'll figure out who it is. So like Tommy couldn't have played it any other way because there's a potential that it could have been Tommy at the end of the day. But it could have been. They could have changed it. They could have changed their mind 500 times overall. But then they kind of got to the end, like, okay, again, I feel like they would like threw darts to the wall. Like, okay, we're gonna make Roy the killer then at this point. Okay, that works. Let's do it. Wrap it up.
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing, and again, this is the first time in the series that it feels like the body count is, double digits to the point that it's actually a little jarring
Yeah,
because and they admit it. They were like the studio came in and started to notice that every 9 pages of the script there needed to be some sort of murder. And so then you end up with this weird 10 minutes of film where 4 people are murdered next to their cars within minutes of each other because they're just trying to up the body count.
and
And
you know
that's
what?
so odd.
No, I agree also, and you think about the first 4 films, they all, like, took place over a night. So Jason does all this in a night. In 5, like, there's just a lot of death going on, and the cops aren't shutting everything down, like, the cops are involved the entire time. We had sequences where the cops are finding these dead bodies. They're not doing anything to shut it down. There's not this there would've been, like, a big manhunt. There would've been some kind of big response. We have the mayor in there and the sheriff saying calling about, like, I think it's Jason Voorhees. And the mayor is saying, no, it's not. They actually invoked Jason Voorhees, which is actually probably a mistake. And they
Yeah,
say that he was burnt and he was cremated and everything else. But like, you can almost get away with it in your head. That's all in one night. That there's no police involvement. When it happens, this case, and there's all these police involvement. There would have been a much different response. The place would have been shut down. Everything would have been locked down. This is a kind of a
yeah.
weird scenario, but they don't care. It just kind of like floaters around.
Yeah, it's very odd, and I think that because, the franchise has always kind of played fast and loose with its time anyway, and, like,
Yeah.
the way that no one ever thought about any of this. Again, this is the hindsight is 2020 thing, right?
Right. Right.
No one wants to pay attention to the chronology fully, or, they wanna be able to play with it their own way, but you also have a very specific way that these movies play out, in the same way that the Halloween movies are all set theoretically over a night usually,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Until they're
Absolutely.
not.
And then it
Because
doesn't
even
work.
Halloween Ends gets that, like, weird time shift thing happening where now suddenly it's days. Even
Yeah.
Halloween 2018 is kind of over a couple of days
Right.
comparative, but, like, for the most part, they're singular events.
Right, that's what I'm trying to say, is a singular event. This doesn't
Oh,
feel
no,
like a
right.
singular event.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to add to your
Right. No,
argument,
I agree,
and
I agree.
yeah,
It
we're
feels
not
like
trying to
as I'm
step on
looking through my notes more and more, it feels like this is what happens basically is like the whole film is a case of we're gonna introduce a couple characters in this scene. The next scene, they're gonna get killed. Or we're gonna introduce a character here, bring in the next person gets killed, introduce them, get killed. Because you think about it, we get the kids, We get Shelley Light, whatever, and he gets killed.
Yeah.
We get all of a sudden we get like introduced to the rednecks who get killed a little bit later on. We get introduced to the greasers who are randomly there. We have no reason for these greasers to be in this movie whatsoever, except for Jason Fodder. And
Yeah.
it's so weird. Like, I'm gonna kick your ass. You gotta fix the car. Gotta kick your ass. It's like this weird, like, what are we doing with these characters? But they're literally there to get a flare kill and get a classic machete across the throat kill. But then we get, and then we have like the diner sequence again. We met the one guy earlier. We get the girl who just says it's showtime, and then we're gonna showing her breasts into the mirror because that's a funny thing, I guess. And then they get killed. Like there's no time spent with these characters to care enough about them before they get killed. It's all introducing Jason Fodder, getting killed, and then the end we'll kind of we'll figure it out.
Well, and that's such a weird thing too, because for a movie to want to be a whodunit, you can't keep killing off every character that you're running into either.
Right.
And like that also becomes an issue, right? Because if you
Right.
start killing every character, then eventually what was the point of the red herring of it all?
Right.
And
case in point, a red herring completely forgot about the vagrant guy, the guy who comes up to Ethel and Junior, and it's like, oh, that's kind of a cool thing. I actually thought like, oh, this must be a red herring character that lasts for a while. But they introduce him. It's like, okay, so here's a stranger in the town, stranger in the area. He's got a little bit of a crazy eye. Okay, maybe he's the one that's going to kill people. He gets killed the next time we see him. You see him watching the kids have sex. Like it's like, okay, he was even okay, so maybe he is, and then he gets killed. It's like, what are we doing here? Why are you doing this now? Wait to the end where you can kill off them all at that point, and then it becomes more of a classic whodunit.
Yeah, there's just such odd thought process behind it, I feel like. And again, I do appreciate the idea. The problem is that it feels too haphazardly thrown together with a filmmaker who wasn't quite getting a handle on the material or thought he was above it enough that it didn't matter.
Right.
But frankly speaking, it kind of does, because now you've really trapped the franchise in a weird way, because this movie ends up like it's made for next to nothing, and it's not like it didn't make money. It still made $21 million, almost $22 million at the box office, but it was such a steep decline from the previous two entries because people felt so pissed off and so kind of betrayed by it. I mean, the truth is that the last movie before this made $33 million at the box office, and part 3 before that had done 36. So you're looking at a, $16 million drop almost.
Absolutely. And that's because of two things, I think. First of all, you market it as a final film. I think the audience felt a little betrayed that there's going to be a new one.
Yes.
So there's a decline right there. Then you have the people come in and they're like, oh, okay. So it's a tired sequel to a tired franchise. And and how do you combat that? By doing a tired, sad cover band of a movie.
Yeah. With characters that are just not as interesting. As much as I love Reggie, again, totally
lead singer. With a different lead singer, basically, as the band. It's like it's not even a cover band. It's like your old band decided to go back out on the road with a new lead singer. It's like, okay, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah, I mean, credit where credit's due. Shavar Ross's Reggie is like a standout in the movie, but like, I don't feel anything for Pam, who is the final girl in this movie. There's no reason to. We're never built to care about her as a character. No. And again, I would even argue, why should I care about Tommy? He has nothing to do in this movie other than beat up one of the. Yeah.
Yeah, he did that moment where he goes nuts at the breakfast scene. It's kind of like, why are you doing this? I don't understand why Tommy's even doing this. He gets scared and I don't know. I guess they're trying to make him out to be traumatized, and I guess that works to.
And again, it's the red herring, right? Because he's
the red herring of it. He's violent, exactly. But it takes you out of the movie. It takes you out of rooting for him. You don't root for the guy who beats up the guy randomly in a way. So who are we rooting for here?
No, nope. I'm apparently not rooting for Jason either, because Jason's not real.
Jason's not real. Fedora is good at what he does, but he's barely in it enough to really make a case for himself. I guess Reggie is our character. Reggie's the one we root for.
Reggie is, because again, he is the Tommy Jarvis supplement this time, right?
Yep.
That it is. He's great, and he's wonderful, and he's funny, and he stands out. And again, that's why I like Demon also. Demon is a fun character.
Agreed. Agreed. Demon is a fun character, in a very short amount of time. And I got to be honest with you, the other fun characters, as ridiculous as they are, I do have a fun time with the Randy Quaid Light and the Red Decks because they're just kind of funny.
Yeah,
They're cartoonish, and it almost feels like you want. I'd rather have more of them than some of the other people. Every time she
I
swears,
honestly, I wish that Demon and Reggie and the redneck couple and the cops were the only characters in this movie.
mhm,
I think if you cut out all the rest and then you make it a whodunit again, that is a much more interesting movie
I agree,
than the one we
100%.
ended up with. And that's the thing. Again, this movie is not even bad. It's really harmless and it's fun to watch, but it's so odd because it's not a bad movie. It's just a weirdly misguided hodgepodge of people not knowing what to do with this franchise after they killed Jason. They
Yeah,
really they committed too far to killing Jason, which is a good thing, only for it to backfire spectacularly because now they don't know what to do.
right. And it's almost like, should they have bothered? And in
Right.
case I get the idea that it's a horror making franchise, and I've said it before, you might as well run to the well while you're making money. And case in point, like you said earlier, the budget was like 2 million. It still made over 20 million. That's still a profitable movie, and that's why they keep coming back for more. But
Mhm.
I feel like they could have done better by letting it rest a little bit, giving it a little bit of a rest, and coming back with a more coherent way to bring Jason back for a new sequel. Skip this movie entirely. Go right to Jason Lives if you had to. I think that's the way to do it. This is becomes a tired case of excess. It's just it doesn't harm the franchise, but it definitely doesn't help the franchise either.
No, and again, I'd argue if we had actually gotten a real follow-up to this movie, and that's a weird argument to have, right? Like, a movie should be able to speak for itself,
Right.
and we always talk about that, like, movies you brought it up earlier, not getting ahead of a franchise, a movie should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, to wrap this all back around to a thing we were talking about earlier.
Right.
It's a little bit of a different argument, but it still applies to what we're talking about, is that this movie should be able to stand on its own, but the truth of the matter is it really doesn't either,
No.
because the question then becomes, would this movie had been better had it actually been followed up on? And that becomes the bigger argument of, is this a bad movie or is this actually a movie with really good ideas and it's actually pretty good and it just never got a proper follow-up, so now it stands out as bad because it never was followed up on. And that's almost not fair to the movie.
Right. It isn't. It isn't. Here's a question I have now, though. We're talking about movies standing on their own. Does this retroactively? I think I know the answer to this one compared to my other comparison. Retroactively, what does this make you think about chapter 4? And I ask that because I know in my heart, retroactively, Halloween 5 almost leaves a bitter aftertaste for Halloween 4 for me. I love
Right.
Halloween 4, one of my favorite sequels. The fact that that was set up so well for them to hit it out of the park and then they flubbed it
And then
so
they
badly in
squander it
Halloween
so bad.
5, like, it actually leaves a little bit of a bitter aftertaste when I watch the end of 4. The end of 4, which was one of my favorite horror endings back in the day. I
Right.
love that ending.
You and I have
Now,
talked about that a lot.
right, but you watch it now, and it's kinda like, yeah, but you know where it's going. In this case, you have Tommy with the eyes opening at the end. It's a little more subtle than the Halloween one, but the Tommy looking maniacal at the end of chapter 4, does that kinda, like, feel like, "What are we doing here now?"
Yeah, a little bit, but I think that the funny thing is I think I still allow Halloween 4 the pass just because I think overall, I just think Halloween 4 is a good movie too.
Yeah,
Like, I like the characters in that movie. I like
right.
a lot of what it's doing. I like a lot of what it and it helps that it still has Donald Pleasance, right?
Well,
So there's still a
absolutely.
familiarity of the franchise to that point, whereas
Right,
this could have felt different had Corey Feldman still been the lead.
right. Yes, that's a good
You
point.
know? So, there's a part of Halloween 4's existence that will never go under for me
Mhm.
because we still have the Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis.
Gotcha.
Whereas this movie doesn't have it has Tommy, but it's not a Tommy we know, therefore, it also kinda weirdly lives in a world where it's a little uncomfortable because of that.
Yeah, that's
And
a good
so it
point.
doesn't hurt my love for part 4, But I think that also is why we don't look back as fondly on this 5 comparative to Halloween 5, which I also still contend is not a good movie. I don't like Halloween. I like this part 5 more than Halloween part 5. I'll say that much.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Yeah.
Because this one is more ineffective, but it's not as bumbling as it was, as it were. I think in a way.
And it also doesn't feel like a slap in the face in the same way.
Right.
As weird
Right.
as
Yeah.
that might sound, like, this movie is at least attempting some swings that are different and interesting
Mm.
versus when you look at Halloween 5 and it's sure trying to do something. What that thing is, couldn't really tell you.
Mm.
It made Michael cry,
Yep.
like, quite literally in the movie, "You absolute fucks, what were you thinking?" Um, and he lived in a gothic mansion this whole time, did you know?
Yeah, I did
What?
not know. I like how
Uh,
his houses grew and grew and grew and grew until part 5, where it was a mansion. I didn't know houses could grow like that.
I didn't either. Halloween 5 is the perfect example of really screwing the pooch just about every way, because I don't even like the Michael performance in that movie, like, we've talked about that, I don't like the Michael very much in that movie.
It's also a
So
director who is far more arrogant, and you talk about directors who think they're above the material. That's what this director
yeah,
completely was. Completely
right,
more.
100%.
Like Steinman
So
for 5 here might be coked up and insane, but I feel like I'd rather take coked up and insane than somebody who's arrogantly saying this material sucks and I'm gonna make a movie out of this now, comparatively.
right. Yeah, 100%. So to answer your question, I don't think this movie has that bitter it has a bitter aftertaste, but it's more in a frustration even 40 years later
Yeah.
sort of aftertaste, less of they really dropped the ball aftertaste because for all intents and purposes, Tommy should just not be the villain.
Right.
And that is what it is. Now, granted, I 100% pitched this idea of having him be the villain until he's not in another movie, but that's a more interesting angle
Right.
than turning him into the villain. And I think that Womp Stomp, as we've talked about a lot with Never Hike Alone 2 coming out literally this Friday, which
Yeah.
I'm super thrilled about. I can't wait to watch it. But with Never Hike Alone 2 dropping, we're gonna see Tommy Jarvis finally get to be like the hero of his own story
Right.
post part 6. And I'm very excited about that because part 6 makes the point that Tommy should have been the hero and not like the quiet, weird performance that we
Whatever.
get out of it, the mute
Yeah.
performance that he's violent and rageful and maybe just actually Jason.
Absolutely. I agree. Um, all right. Last thing in my notes that I have 2 more things in the notes I wanted to throw in there. Besides I do have the another through the bed murder, like we talked about earlier.
I
Which is
still can't
funny.
get over that.
It's
Like
like,
they really go to that for the 4th time?
right. It's just like, God, that's a calling card, I guess, in a way, but it's not working like you think it's working at all.
Well, and
It's
again, this one does the same thing I talk about with the rest of the movie too. There's a lot of implied off-screen violence, and they've talked about that a lot of the violence was filmed and cut because of the ratings board.
right.
But that really hurts this film because so many of the deaths in it feel so toothless.
Yeah.
Like, I can't say it any other way. Like, it just feels like they're because we don't see so much of it and so much of it feels implied, it feels like it wants so badly to have its cake and eat it too. And it's like, look how violent we are, except we're
Right.
not because we don't really actually show it.
Right. Absolutely. It works against itself in a case where, especially considering how glorified it was, like it feels like it's going the wrong way in terms of what you want to show. But it is what it is. Another thing I want to mention, I have to mention, this, we can't go through this podcast. I texted it before. Damn those enchiladas, man.
Damn those enchiladas, man.
We've all been there.
What a line.
It's my favorite line delivery of the movie by far. And that actually, I'm going to throw it in there. Well, I'll ask what yours is. That's my favorite death. And it's because of the character. Like you have the guy in
Yeah.
the outhouse being shaped around, and you got the sword being thrust through the outhouse and everything else. And while he's saying baby, the whole scene is like probably the best done scene in the movie because we care about this character already, probably because of Reggie, partially. But it's a fun sequence. It's a throwback to a different time. This felt like a scene out of like one of the original, out of the other Friday the 13th that
Yes.
we grew up loving. It felt like this is like this is at the sad cover band playing its greatest hit, and you still kind of forget where you are at this moment. You kind of get caught up in it.
Yeah,
That's what I love.
that's my favorite death as well. I mean, the obvious, most gruesome death, and the one that people talk about a lot, obviously, is the belt around the eyes, and that is a great death. That is the one that actually feels very violent and visceral. And I do actually like the hot poker in the carjacker's mouth, that or the greaser's mouth, not the
Yeah,
carjacker. That one is very cool because that actually feels like a classic Friday the 13th kill.
right.
Similarly, when you look at the Tina kill with um, the shears,
Yes.
that one is cool because of the angle.
Right.
But I think that you're right. I think Demon's death is the most interesting and the most cool because it feels the most classically Friday the 13th to that point.
100%.
I like when they get creative in that capacity, and like having the spear coming through in different angles is really fun, and like you're never sure how it's going to pop through and finally get him. And that's the one time it actually feels like it's having fun and really leaning in on it, because everything else to this point, and this is maybe this isn't a fair criticism, but everything else just feels so old hat to this point,
Yeah.
in what it's trying to do. And I don't mean to knock it that way, but I think you're right. I think that the stuff that it's leaning on showing, because it, again, they talked about it a lot, and it has come under attack in the years since, of how leering the film feels at its female actresses,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And all their parts, and some of them were cast just because of their breast size and so they could take their clothes off within the movie.
Right.
And inherently, yes, that's what these movies were. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not trying to be
Single
above the
out.
material
Right.
or anything, but there is a sense, again, of this is the movie that really goes that next step in, like, really having so much of it, it feels like in your face,
Hmm.
that because of that, they used that to get around having less violence. And I don't know if I like that trade-off, as weird as
Yeah.
that might sound.
I agree. I agree. It had a balance that worked for it before, and the balance is definitely disturbed during this franchise film.
And
Um,
also, can we talk about the Lana Vinny deaths? Like the random
yeah,
diner deaths? I why?
it's the same as the greaser deaths. It's just like we need a couple more
It's
deaths
just
on scene
I
on
love
screen.
the when he brings up this idea of the doctor approved cocaine because he's trying to hype himself up of why he should be doing it. It's like there's no doctor in the world that prescribed you cocaine, you absolute
Right.
fuck. Like,
Yeah.
stop this. I wish that I liked more of the characters more in this too.
Yeah.
I really do. I
Agreed.
just genuinely, this is not a bad movie by any means, and I know that we've been harder on it, but it's very easy to like take this movie apart and look at it in a broad spectrum of why it doesn't fully work, and
Right.
still being like there are still good things. Like, again, we have pointed to characters that we like, or deaths that we like, or even ideas that we like. And the fact that I can come up with an entire reality of, oh, maybe it's just all in Tommy's head, and that, again, the world's biggest sin would be the entire movie is a dream and Tommy has actually been the killer the entire time.
Yeah.
But honest to God, I'd almost like that more in the end.
Which is
And I
scary, right?
headcanon it that way because that's scarier than the rest of the movie.
And what's scary also the fact that such a kind of a hack-on cliched kind of scenario would be more appealing to us than what we got.
Right, exactly.
Uh,
So I just want it noted, like, I love these movies and I enjoy this one. It's fun to watch. It's campy, it's cheesy, it's weird. And yes, it definitely feels more like a grindhouse movie. And so for that side of it alone, I enjoy it a lot.
right, right.
I just wish that it was on the same page with itself, because everyone seems to be on different pages, from the people within the movie to the person directing the movie to the person that was writing the movie to the producers. No one seemed to really be on the same page of how to make Jason live again, if as it were.
They get it right a year later or so, but that's
Yeah.
then, not now. Anything else that you have to say about the movie before we wrap things up?
No,
And
I think I kind of covered all of my bases with this one.
yeah,
Although I will say there is an odd feel to this movie. It's very clear that a lot of it is ad libbed. and you
Yeah,
can tell that the characters are very much just being played by people, and there is a kind of fun to that. So a lot of the characters definitely at least feel like characters because they're being made up on the spot in
right.
their dialogue and the choices that they're making within.
And that just solidifies to me exactly what this film is. It's a case of, okay, we have check off this kill, this kill, this kill, this kill, this kill. Now find us a way to get there, guys. Find a way to get
Yeah.
us there, and that's what they do. All right, well then it's time to rank this film, then, my friend. I'm going to remind us of our numbers. We always rank things at between 1 and 11 because we always turn things up to 11 here on PLD projects. The original Friday the 13th, I gave a 6. You gave a 6.5. Part 2, I gave a 7. You gave an 8.5. Part 3, I also gave a 7. And you also gave a 7. And then
Mhm.
part 4, I gave a 9.5. You gave a 10 out of 11. So with that in mind, where do you put Friday the 13th, part 5, A New Beginning?
It's weird because I feel like for how hard I've been on it, I need to give it such a lower rating. But the truth is like I keep saying, I actually like a lot of what's actually happening in parts in this movie. There is things that I really like about it. I like some of the ideas. I like some of what's going on. I think I'm gonna give this a 6. Like, just very middle of the road, it's not the worst movie, it's not the best movie. I think it's got a lot of its own issues, a lot of stuff hurt this movie in the process, but boy, when it hits, it hits.
I gotta tell you, it's kind of funny. We tend
Mhm.
to do the same thing. We tend to do like as far as our ratings go, like, and we are basically ranking these exactly the same as we go along. You're just a little bit higher than me. For example, 6.5 to 6, 8.5 to 7, 7 to 7, 10 to 9.5. You gave this one a 6. I'm giving it a 5.5. For
Oh my
exactly the
god, are
same.
you serious?
I had it written down. I wrote it down before you even came up, and that's exactly how it worked out. We're the same kind
Oh
of thing.
my
I kind
god.
of feel like it's eminently watchable. It's not something that
Yeah.
like is something I need to like. I'm not gonna. If I had to pick one Friday the 13th movie, I'm not gonna pick this one out to watch. But if it's on a marathon, I'm not gonna turn it off either. I'll watch it because there's
Right.
some great moments. There's some great, yeah, I want to say great characters, but at least cartoonish, fun characterizations here and there. We got the
Yes.
Reggie, we got the rednecks, things of that nature. It makes it fun enough to watch. And quite frankly, the fact that it is a swing and does try something different, even if it's a copycat killer, does make it in some ways engaging and interesting, and it makes it
Right.
stand out. So I can't knock
Again,
that
it
entirely.
should be I 100% think it should at least be commended that it does attempt. It doesn't
Right,
land it,
right.
but they try so hard to
At
do
least
something. The
swerve it.
problem is that just no one was on the same page trying to do it. And that's ultimately the biggest problem with the film, I think.
100%. I agree. Uh, all right. One last thing we have to do. I don't know if we do this or not. We have been ranking our Jasons. Now, this isn't a Jason per se, but should we, like in parentheses, still kind of rank it and go from there, or should we not rank this
I
guy this
think it
next?
just needs to be mentioned that we don't really need to rank him because it's really not Jason, it's Roy. Like there
Okay.
is a Jason in the movie, but he just stands there. I
Right.
don't feel like that's a fair assessment. And again,
Comparison.
if it was Tommy the entire time being controlled by Jason, then we could have another conversation altogether.
Right. I think
But
I agree.
as that is not what the movie is actually doing, even though I think it is what it's doing,
I agree.
I'm
I
gonna
agree
leave it.
and concur. So we will not be ranking this Jason because he's not really Jason. And there's not
Correct.
enough of the real Jason in there to do so. So, well, alrighty then. That will do it for this week, folks. Thanks for sticking around for us. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to take on Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, sixth entry in this franchise, and I really can't wait to
The
talk
best.
about this one because, quite
The
frankly, this
best.
is one of my favorites. Um, I don't know if I have it as my absolute favorite, but it's definitely
It's definitely
top
mine.
top 3. I think I think that I have a little bit of nostalgia building for me for 7 that I like more, maybe a little bit.
You love
Um,
Jason versus Harry, it's fair.
I do, but we'll get there. That I can't wait to talk about. Either way, though, it's gonna be a fun time because when we talk about stuff we love, that's when we have our favorite episodes, so to speak. So,
Yep.
where can the folks find you there, folks, BJ?
Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, the whole thing. PJ_Campbell. You know how to find me. Hanging out here with this gentleman. We got some other stuff we're working on too. Should be a lot of fun. It's just been very busy lately. So,
Really
only
has
so
been.
much you can do sometimes.
Absolutely. You can find me at Paul Cortinuzio on Twitter, and you can find me all over the place at PLD Projects on Threads, Paul Cortinuzio on Blue Sky. You can find me all over PLD Projects, like I said before, every other week here on Two Mediocre Way to Use on Film, every other week on Review with Lego. We go through the franchise V. Holy Snopes returns tomorrow. We're going to finally. One thing I was really upset about last week, I couldn't talk about the Ahsoka series season finale because I was so sick. But Maddie and I are going to go a week late and talk about Ahsoka season finale and go from there. Every week with Manny Gunner on Star Wars, and of course Crown Jewels every week on Crown Jewels. We talk about Queen. I talk about Queen rather. Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun here. I hope you stick around with me. And if this is the first time you've been here, hit that like, hit that subscribe, leave us comments. If you're
Thanks for coming and hanging out with us.
Absolutely. And if you want to help even further, want to support you even further, patreon.com/PLD Project, join such stalwart individuals as Austin Cadell, Jeremiah Morris, Matthew Kearns, Brandon Buckingham, and Jeff Alterman. Couldn't do this without you guys. You really help us keep the lights on, let us move forward. I really can't say enough about you guys. Really do appreciate you. If you can't join the Patreon, though, I completely understand. Just spread the word. Spread the word. Get us out there. Let us know what you want to see from us. We have Two Mediocre White Tees pretty planned out for a little while. Yeah, the rest of the Friday 13th franchise, including Never Hike Alones, those will be done throughout the rest of the year. We do have to finally do John Wick for Kelly, our patron Kelly, who back the day wanted us to do the John Wick franchise. We said we would do that. But then after that, I think we actually have some fun non-singular movie ideas. So maybe some ranking.
I'm excited for that.
We might get to do, and that's going to be a lot of fun as well. So yeah, I can't wait. So we'll talk more about that when we figure out exactly what that is. Yeah. But until next time, my friends, stay mediocre. Never underestimate the power of mediocrity. Bye now.
Bye.